I want you to understand that I invest in a relatively narrow way. I only do the United States. So the things I'm talking about here are not thought about in the context of anything global, okay? I think some of the things really apply, and I'd love your thoughts about how that happens. But I don't want you thinking that I've boiled the ocean here, because that's not what's going on. The second thing is that this slide deck is the product of 3 years and a series of lovely historical accidents. It began in the fall of 2010. Elevation had completed what I hoped was a very successful investment cycle. You know, we had made only 8 investments with $2 billion, but 2 of them were Facebook and Yelp, so that looked like it was going to work out. And so I thought, as a parting shot, I would do a presentation to tell everybody what I thought was coming next, you know, in the future, in case they wanted to keep investing in tech. Has anyone here ever maintained a Facebook page or been in a position to have to build a social network presence? Anyone? Oh, cool. Okay. So you guys kind of know how hard it is to do that, right? The band, if you come and see us tonight, the thing to understand is that band has been built entirely on Facebook. We've had 3.2 million downloads of our single, for which we've spent essentially nothing. There have only been like 5 songs in the last 3 years that have done 3 million downloads, and ours is one of them. We have 250,000 fans on Facebook, which doesn't sound like a ridiculous number, right? But what if I told you that the average post we had 10% engagement, and that our average weekly engagement exceeds 100%, and that only George Takei has ever been above 100% beside us? And we've been at 375. And we can do it whenever we want. It costs a little bit of money, but we can take it to that number every time. If you want to build a band, if you want to build a brand from zero today, controlling the whole damn thing yourself is really helpful. Now, what do you point them at? In our case, we point them at video. If you go to moonalice.com, tonight's show will be on there live in absolutely pristine 720, full bitrate 720p video on your phone. Last night's show is there now. The night before's show is there now. The last 300 shows are there now. We are a content machine. To this day, we refer to the world we live in as the web and the internet, right? Well, I don't think so. They're 2 totally separate markets. And let's think about this in terms of unit count, right? 55% of all connected devices today look like this or an iPad, right? They're smartphones or iPads. PCs represent less than half. These things go over carriers and Wi-Fi. Different kind of network architecture. And what's really interesting, completely different set of winners. These are the guys who made the most money from the World Wide Web. Without exception, they have $0 of profit over here. Although Facebook looks like it's going to get there. Google someday, but not today. I mean, it's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Hey, look at this. So I think we need different vocabulary. And you can pick any you like. I happen to pick this one. We call it the hypernet. Why? Because I don't think it's just 2 columns. I think this is the beginning of a much cooler, bigger thing. So just bear with me for a moment and imagine we're in this notion of there's lots and lots and lots of devices where there used to be very few. And everybody has more than one. And since they have more than one, they have a new set of problems they didn't have, like, I have this somewhere, I just don't know where it is. Secondly, before 1980, if you were a business or a consumer and you wanted to use a computer, the one you used was designed originally for intercontinental ballistic missile targeting. And you had to adapt it. It's called mainframe. From 1980 to 2000, if you were the government or a consumer and you wanted to use the technology, you had to use one optimized for business. It was called PC. Well, since 2000, the cool new shit is all for consumers. So the really smart money is going to sit there and look at that and go, what can I do with this that I couldn't do before? And what does it do to my cost structure? The answer is it changes your cost structure completely. A company that insists on staying on PCs, who's competing against a company that uses these instead, is going to get killed. because their IT budget is going to cost them between 5 and 7%, and they're going to get negative return on it. If you use these things, the employee pays for them. All you do is hook them up. It's like, right? So the world's really changed. Well, guess what? There's some winners and losers out of this, right? And let's think who. Well, 6 years ago, Microsoft had 96% market share of connected devices, right? Before smartphones. 96. They're at 42 and falling like a rock. Whoops. It's amazing it took them that long to fire Ballmer. And then you look over here and you go, wait a minute, what about search? What about Google? What happened there? Well, the answer is that index search is still a really big deal in the wired web. And that's still growing a little bit. And Google's market share is growing a little bit. And the cash flow is fantastic. But in mobile, the use cases are different. The behavior is different. Going to the web to ask a question on a 3G phone is a really painful experience. Not interesting. So people have learned to adapt. And they've done it with apps. Because when we search on these bad boys, we use Facebook or Twitter or Yelp or New York Times or whatever, right? That's how we do it now. And, yeah, Google gets some of that, but not much, and certainly nothing like what they got when index search was the way you found everything. When you're thinking about next generation technology, one of the things that's really useful to keep in mind, as I say, is history. Tech industry is kind of predictable. And we go to extremes, right? We start in one place, and we do something until people won't take anything more. Then we literally turn around and go back the other way. So it's like these guys who reorg companies from divisional to functional and back, right? It's like something to do, right? Golden Gate Bridge, right? The when they're done painting on one end, they have to go back and start at the other end again. Well, tech's just like that. 1984, Apple introduces the Macintosh, but that wasn't the key innovation. The key innovation was Adobe's PostScript. It allowed you to have fonts, to have page layout, to think about things graphically. So from 1984 to 1998, a period of 14 years, the entire productive power of the computer industry was devoted to making their customers' content look better and be more valuable. Everything. 1998, so pendulum goes from total commodity to maximum differentiation. Google comes in and goes, hey, nobody can find anything on the web. I'll fix that. Pay no attention to me freezing all the tools and commoditizing your content over here, but I'll organize it, at least everybody can find it. They do that and completely commoditize everything. People get bored. Apple comes in with apps, moves us a little off the schneid. Here's the question. You saw those guys who are the big success stories on the World Wide Web. Oracle, Microsoft, Yahoo, Google, Facebook. It might be in their interest to try to push us back this way because the world commodity content might favor them. But there are also people for whom differentiated content favors, right? It's kind of more democratic. Everybody can kind of do their own thing. And this is really important because in a world of commoditized content, the problem is discovering. If everything looks the same, finding out what's good is really hard. In a world where content is differentiated, content finds its customers by word of mouth. Guys, remember Coney 2012 about the African warlord? Remember that video? There were 100 million views in 6 days on YouTube. 100 million in 6 days. It was barely in the index. That was all young women in the southeastern United States sharing this with their friends, and the friends sharing it with their friends, et cetera, et cetera. Differentiated content is really interesting because it doesn't get done in scale. So you wind up having lots of people, and the people who create it win, but so do the consumers because there's more differentiation. There's a higher probability of something that's just right for you. So if you want to think about it from an investment point of view, this is a winner-take-all market, right? The last 10 years, we've had, well, let's call it 15. We've had 2 companies in the tech world that legitimately made the S&P 500 as the top 500, or Fortune 500, excuse me, the top 500 revenue companies in the country, Google, Facebook. That's it. Not very interesting for investors. Over here, you're going to have gazillions of winners. The whole economy gets better. So think of this as the world of creating a small number of big tech companies who rule everything. This is the world of tech being used by the real economy to make the real economy work better. So that's just inherently cool. We're talking about consumer technologies can be applied to anything. So I'm a big fan of breaking up not just Google, but also Apple, Amazon, all the other concentrators, middlemen, right? So if you want to do that, you got to go back to open systems, which is why I think HTML5 is kind of interesting. So what is HTML5? HTML is the software programming language of the internet. It's just code. And HTML5 is HTML4, the old one, +1. But the +1 is really important. Because the reason why looking at the web on a 3G phone is terrible is because of a product called Adobe Flash. Adobe Flash is the way that you see images on old-fashioned web pages. It's a very old product designed for something else, and it's a separate application. So each instance of Flash in the page boots separately. That's why when your page is coming up, you see one box at a time, and your text is last. Very frustrating. In HTML5, Flash goes away. Every pixel is the same. Why does this matter? Flash only works in rectangles. Well, that's going to kind of limit your design options. Not only that, Flash is incompatible with HTML. You can't search from one into the other, which means you can't tie the S to the content. Right? All that goes away in HTML5. All that functionality is built into the language. It makes everything streamlined. It gets rid of a ton of bugginess. It makes it perform faster. It uses less bandwidth. And oh, by the way, you don't need anybody's permission in an app store, and you don't pay 30 points. So if you got a brand, you can keep 100% instead of maxing out at 70. So this is what I think is going to happen, right? We're going to have 3 stacks like right away. Wired, mobile, both. Now, how big is this? Right now, it is a sliver. Maybe it'll always stay a sliver. If it does, the world's going to be really boring. And you want to be deeply long Apple and deeply long Google. However, it's possible that the world's about to change on those guys in a way that either makes them or kills them. Context. When you first bought a personal computer, the only thing it could tell you was the time. When you got a phone, though, it had GPS and knew where you were. When you got to a smartphone, it had your calendar. Now, if I know exactly where you are, exactly what time it is, and exactly where you're supposed to be, shouldn't I be helping you? Why isn't Apple creating a product so that when it backs me up on iCloud, it takes my calendar and returns to me every conversation, every email that I've had with the person I'm going to see, a link to the company page with maybe the most important page actually with the image there, a couple Wikipedia things, maybe the directions. How about the traffic? How about alerting me that I need to leave home 10 minutes early because there's road construction? That stuff, I mean, you literally can do that in the cloud overnight and just return it to somebody. It's just, I mean, all that stuff already exists. This is just programming. Imagine that this becomes the controller for every subsystem in your house and your office, right? See, I think the next thing that happens here is we're applying tech to the needs of everybody. I think the big problem now is that we have so many devices that we can't find the things we want. So one of the gigantic career and investment opportunities is to position yourself in front of helping people essentially virtualize their content so it doesn't matter where it is, right? You have access, you have a dashboard to it from anywhere. Well, if you apply that logic to the home, that takes you to locks that can be unlocked without you being there and then relocked without you being there. It takes you to Jawbone for fitness kind of things, Fitbit, Player for watching video up on, and now everybody else for watching, you know, phone video on your big computer, Roomba, Nest, all these things. I think to a first approximation, every major industrial category in the home is going to get automated by these things because it makes a ton of sense. Security, babysitting, keeping an eye on grandma, you know, when to take your medication, right? All of those things, all the systems are there now. The house is already wired. You don't have to buy anything, right? It's just like really simple. And this isn't going to produce any Googles, right? But it's going to produce 500 companies with $300 to $1 billion of incremental revenues. Somebody is going to get this right and make locks a growth business again. Think about that for a minute. These are not businesses that are going to get won by 22-year-olds. These are businesses that get done by people who really understand the lock business and then find somebody who really understands iPhones. All the trends right now about cities. It's fascinating. Life expectancy in cities in the US used to be shorter than the country. Now it is meaningfully longer, even in New York. In fact, New York is going ballistic. There will become a time when New York is so far above the national average on life expectancy as to defy belief. Because if you're not driving, you've taken away the largest accidental source of death and injury. What else happens? Cities are safer. They have much better access to health care, right? In a shared economy, they have access to everything. Well, what does this mean? This means that the capital's going to get pooled, right? They're going to be like 5 guys who own all the cars, right? And parking spaces will be all full of zip car equivalents, right? When you need a car, you'll have your thumb thing and you just do your iPhone 5S thing and get in the car, right? And you look at this and you go, holy shit. I mean, if you're Simon and you own all these suburban malls, I mean, I thought they were screwed. This is worse than screwed, right? I mean, they ought to get good at laser tag, right? Because they're going to need something to do with those. Maybe paintball, right? Great for paintball. But this is what the political battle in Washington is about. We are looking at the death rattle of rural America, right? They're using the last thing that they have, which is the Congress, to try to slow this down. But your generation is way ahead of them, and you outnumber them, so it's going to be cool. Today, we measure gross domestic product, which is a measure of things. In a society that's rapidly choosing experiences over things, that is a really bad idea and causes you to make really bad policy decisions. I think this is the real reason the Fed is so confused. So you look at this and you go, holy moly, right? What does it mean? Less oil demand means we screw the Middle East. Like, who cares, right? Better air. I mean, I like both of those things. Longer life expectancy. Major changes in work and opportunity, right? Bad for Hanover, spectacular for Boston, right? Big societal changes. What do you do with all the people who are deeply invested in the old way of doing things? This is going to be very hard. This is important because if you look at the list of people at the head of that, many of them are big recruiters here. So if you aren't careful, you may wind up being the last generation in the old way of doing things.
What do you think is going to be kind of the primary medium by which content is delivered? Is it going to be fiber networks or the satellite thing?
Don't think it matters. So the question is, how do I think content will be delivered? And I think we should assume for the purposes of this conversation that the transport is not where the value is. So I happen to believe that video as an application, so if you think about the internet's called a packet switching network. And what that means is it takes the information, breaks it up into packets of equal size, sends them with the most efficient way for each individual packet, and then reassembles them at the far end. If you're doing text or a picture, that works great. If you're doing something like audio or video, audio works pretty well because there's not that many bits. But video is really wide and really long, and it works really badly that way. Video works better on a connection model, which is the way the telephone system works. So what's really cool about satellite is satellite allows you to have a connection system. So I think satellite is the right way to handle video. And if you move video off the packet network, that's going to relieve congestion for essentially the rest of our lifetimes. So that would be the way I'd look at it. But please do not look at transport as where the value is, okay? I happen to believe that if the sharing economy is right, the kind of investing you're doing is the only kind that's going to work. But calling it that dooms you because it forces you to view yourself in a quartile ranking of you're going to make a relative scale of what qualifies as socially responsible, which will drive you into things that are overpriced. I sit there and I go, in what way would Seagate not be socially responsible if it figures out a way at much lower cost for you to get access to stuff that keeps you from driving so much? And you know what I'm saying? If they virtualize stuff, it's going to prevent all these unnecessary trips back to the office to get computers and files and all that kind of stuff. My point is it's all of the filter you apply to it. And the filters being applied by the folks who create those categories are uniformly bullshit. The simple way of thinking about this is all battles take place at night, in the rain, at the intersection of 4 different maps, right? Nothing happens where you want it to happen, right? Ever. Which means to the extent you create a cubbyhole and compartmentalize people, the opportunity is always at the places where those things overlap. People always focus in the center of the pigeonhole and the opportunities at the edge. I've started 3 different firms that were outside the boundaries of categories. Why? Because that is the only place you can get alpha. So my advice to you is to sit there now and go, I won't invest in a single company that calls itself socially responsible. And the reason is because that's a marketing tool. You want to get somebody who actually believes it and who doesn't need to say it. You get to make your own choices. Doesn't matter what your mother thinks. Doesn't matter what anybody thinks. You get to make your own choices. I encourage you to make them. Don't look back in 10 years or 20 years ago. That guy was right. Or worse yet, damn, he was wrong. Anyway, thank you all very much. I hope you come to the show.